What up? What up? I am not going to have any video of me on this one because I did not feel like setting up the camera, and for whatever reason it just keeps crashing on the phone. So I got tired of dealing with it. So there will be no video of me, not that there needs to be anyway, because checking the live, make sure it's good. Yeah, there doesn't need to be a picture of me anyway. Let's see here. So on this lovely Sunday, I thought that I would take a little trip down memory lane. Well, actually, I already took a trip down memory lane. I was talking to a couple of photographers earlier today, and we were talking about when we first started, professional photography. And I use professional. I put it in air quotes. You can't see me do the air quotes, but I definitely put it in air quotes because as I looked at these images, I was just like, man, I don't know. I don't know how I was charging for these images. So I thought it would just be fun on this Sunday just to kind of go through real quick. Not going to spend a ton of time on it because I don't want to bore you guys, but I thought I would just spend a little bit of time just going through some of my images from my first year as a professional photography. So this right here was the very first client session that I ever had. I was using a Canon T4i with the kit 55 to 250 lens, and I pretty much shot the entire thing on aperture priority. So that kit lens, it was a variable app. I think it was like 3.5 to 5.6, something like that. So by this point, I thought I had it down. You know, I had watched a lot of YouTube videos. I did a lot of practicing. I thought I was pretty good. Come to find out, yeah, nah, this session was interesting. It was interesting. So this was a family session, husband, wife, their first kid. And I don't know that I probably wouldn't say that the images necessarily are terrible, you know, for like my first session. So I think this was, man, I think this was I don't want to say it was the first time that like I had did a session with actual people, but man, it was up there. So this was, let's see, when was this? This was November 16th of 2013. I bought that T4i April of 2013, and I kind of practiced with it all summer and then into the fall time. I think I maybe did like a session with my niece, maybe, and maybe one other session with a friend of mine. And then I was like, all right, I'm good. Yeah. So, so just kind of just going through these, this was my first client session. And what I noticed was that focus, man, I miss focus a lot. And I also, I didn't really understand the concept of, well, I understood the concept of ISO, but there's a lot of shots in here where the shutter speed is just all over the place. It's just all over the place. I mean, at one point I was shooting at a 50th of a second, but I was at ISO 200, you know. I mean, it was pretty bad. It was pretty bad. But let me drop that down. But I would say for the first session working with clients, it wasn't terrible. This was a great location. This was in Ohio. When I go back to Ohio, I need to go back and shoot here, because I really did enjoy this location. I actually did quite a few shoots at this spot. It was a pretty popular spot for photo sessions. Who knows? Probably by now, probably gotta have a permit to shoot there. But I mean, here you can see, obviously there's some motion blur. I mean, I was shooting at 1/100th of a second, ISO 200 at 100 mil. So I mean, even if I would have been following the double, the double rule, I should have been at 1/200. But that's just the way it goes. So this was the first shoot, which I'm not going to spend a ton of time going through these raw images. These are the raw images. But what to this day is hard for me to look at is how I edited these photos, and that's really what I'm going to look at, is edited photos. So to this day, I'm not exactly sure what I was thinking. So you could see. So this is a good example. You can see what it looks like. This was the raw file right here, no edits at all. So you can see how that looks. Now, when I come over here to the edited, I'm not exactly sure why I made these images so daggone warm. Like, I remember when I edited these, I edited them the same day. I remember I was excited to go home and I wanted to get the pictures back to them that day. So this shoot was it was like morning time. So I think it was like 10 or 11. And I went home and I worked on them all afternoon into the evening time, got them delivered that same day. And I mean, I thought I was doing something. Like, I thought these were solid. I mean, look at how warm this is. Now, if I go in and just even use the eyedropper tool, and I put those side by side, and this one is even still warmer than I would typically do. I actually would probably bring it down a little bit. Definitely bring down the oranges. The yellows are a little much. Maybe even the reds just a bit. So this is just real quick where I would have it today. So you can see how warm I had that edited image. I don't even know why I thought that was good. And I remember talking to the client after the fact, because I knew her. And this was like some years later, once I got better. And I was like, yeah, I don't know why I made those images so warm. And she was like, yeah, I noticed that. I just, I didn't say anything because I just thought that, that was like your style or whatever. And I was just like, nah, I just thought that at the time, the computer that I was using and the monitor, like, it just looked really good. But now, obviously, I would say not so much. But I mean, the images aren't for being my first client session. I would say they're not, from just a photography perspective, they're not bad. Editing wise, terrible. But photography wise, not the worst. I mean, this is I don't know if I shot it this tight or if I cropped it this tight, but that's definitely tight. Man, I don't think I would have somebody leaning on the tree, because it always bugs me when I have stuff growing out of people's heads. So I probably wouldn't do that. Plus, there's all this negative space over here. There's just nothing going on. No point doing that. I think I just was trying to put him in the center. Not sure why. That's not terrible. That's fine. Fine. Again, the editing, not great. This was a pose that I saw on Pinterest. It did not look anywhere close to as good as it looked on Pinterest, because I didn't know how to pose. So I had pictures and I just showed them, and I was like, all right, this is what I'm going for. Let's do this. And yeah, it just didn't quite hit it the way I was hoping for. This was also a pose that I saw on Pinterest that I was going for that did not quite work out the way that I had saw it. But I was trying anyway. This wait, did I guess there was some pictures that I taken at that part that was also a Pinterest pose. I think this was probably my favorite out of the whole session. The kid absolutely hated it though. You can't see her face, but she hated this whole part. She did not like this at all, but you can't really tell in the picture, which is cool. Just trying to get some candid shots here because, you know, I wasn't really used to working with kids, obviously. So that was my main driver for using my 55 to 250 was to be able to let me be far back, and then I could just kind of let them do their thing and hope. Now, during this session, I took like 600 pictures, which, man, I don't take anywhere close to that number today, but it actually wasn't as bad as I thought it was. I thought I took way more than that, but it was only like 600 pictures. So again, aside from them being super warm, you know, not terrible. Now, these shots here, they're interesting to look at now because I actually don't shoot on train tracks anymore. I haven't for some years. And it's kind of a controversial and hot topic in the photography space. There are a lot of photographers that get very upset when they see other photographers shooting on train tracks, especially with clients. And then there's photographers that don't really care. You know, I'm kind of in the middle. Like I don't really advocate for shooting on train tracks anymore, but I'm not necessarily like going to shame a photographer if they do it, but you really do have to be careful. But on these tracks, it was just a straight way for miles. So you could see in both directions. Well, you maybe couldn't see for miles, but the track goes straight for miles. And then there was a lot of streets as well, where the train would cross over the street. So there was almost a 0% chance that a train would come and we would not hear it or see it. But I still cringe a little bit when I look at these because, like I said, I don't shoot on train tracks anymore. So it still is kind of like, I don't really love it. But I do feel like the pictures turned out pretty good, though. Again, I'm still using the 55 to 250. And a main driver for that also was to be able to shoot long as well, to be able to get some blur. So, I mean, this was, let's see. Well, I don't know what these are because I must not have put the exit in there, but I was still shooting with the 55 to 250, and a lot of these were at like 200, 225, just so I could still get a little bit of blur back there. Because at 250, even at 200, it was at f5.6. But, you know, because of the telephoto, you know, I was still able to get that blur. So, you know, I feel like these are pretty decent. Again, for being the first client shoot, not bad at all. I definitely delivered a lot of images, which, man, I don't deliver anywhere near close to this many today. I mean, they could buy as many as they want, but I think there's 80. I mean, I would definitely not arbitrarily deliver 80 images in today's time. But this was the first session, so not bad. So this was my first engagement session. Now, the interesting thing about this session was that I went into this session extremely confident. Like, I thought I had everything all figured out. I had a 50 f1.8 at this point in time, and I think I had my 135 f2 as well. So I was like, man, I'm solid. Like, I got this. I had been looking up a lot about posing. I had been practicing a bunch of stuff. The location was super dope. I actually had an assistant that was helping me out. I had 2 assistants that was helping me out actually for this shoot. So I was like planning, I'm going to knock this out the park. And I remember I did the whole session. By the end of it, I was just like, it felt like nothing went the way that I had envisioned it in my mind. I had like all these poses that I wanted to do and all these ideas. And by the end of it, I was just like, I remember at the shoot, and I don't know why I did this. But I remember at the shoot, at the end of it, I was literally like, can we reschedule another session? Because I'm just not happy with how this session turned out. And it didn't end up being able to happen because they actually were getting married like shortly thereafter. But yeah, it was like a crash and burn. And I was heavily defeated because I was just like, man, I thought I was ready. I thought I was good, and I wasn't. So again, editing is just terrible. I mean, I don't know how well it'll come across in the live, but the reds are just way too intense. And my posing just wasn't as good as I thought it was going to be. And again, this location was dope. They just had built this. They had just built it. Probably can't even shoot there now. I imagine the residents probably shut that down. But yeah, posing wasn't great. Lighting wasn't the best. Again, not the worst thing in the world, but definitely not great either. Again, here, lighting's not good. Pose, not good. But your boy was trying. Your boy was trying. Now, this is an interesting shot because I look at this one now and I'm like, I don't know why I chose to backlight him. I mean, clearly you could see, this was sunset time. So you got this soft golden light, and I decided to put the light behind him. I don't know. I'm not exactly sure what my thought process was. I look at this now and I'm just like, doofus, turn them around so that they're being lit by the beautiful light that you have back there. Didn't do that. So then by backlighting them, you get this ugly mess back here. And then, I mean, of course, there's even light on them because it's shadow, but just doesn't make sense. Not exactly sure what I was thinking. Skin tones here are just not good. Don't know. Thought I was doing something. This pose, every time I look at this picture, I'm just like not sure why I thought that this made any sense whatsoever. I mean, this is just a very, there would be no reason to do this. But, I think this was probably, kind of like one of my favorites out of the set. I use favorite loosely, but and this one I kind of like because it had a little bit of flair. But again, I don't know why I didn't go the other way. And I think the background actually would have been better had I had them facing the sun as well. So everything about it, not sure what I was thinking. I did like this shot. This shot was cool. I don't know what story I was trying to tell with it, but I did like the shot. I mean, for engagement photos, I don't know that this quite tells the story that you would want to tell. Like what, I mean, I don't know. They are still together to this day. But not sure what I was trying to tell, and not exactly sure what I was going for here either. Again, for an engagement session. Yeah, I don't know. Just for a random portrait type session, yeah, maybe conceptually it works, but for an engagement, not so much. So then moving on, this was the first headshot session that I did, and man, this just, I definitely cringe when I look at this as well. Now, first of all, you get a lot of red. So I shot this with my 70-200 f4 at f4, and I was using a Yangnuo speed light, and I shot it through a 31-inch umbrella. So you can see the light isn't necessarily hard, but it still is pretty specular. Obviously I had it off camera left. So like lighting wise, it's not the worst in the world, but I mean, it's far from good. It's far from good. And there's a lot of things I could have done to make it better. I would have been better off just bouncing it, because I did it in his house in a small office. Well, no, I don't think it was an office. I think it was like a loft. I would have been better off bouncing the light than using a shoot through umbrella. Like shoot through umbrellas are cool, but you're going to get some specularity shooting through an umbrella. It's only one layer diffusion. You're just blasting the light straight through it. You're going to get some specularity. I'd have been better off just bouncing the light. I still could have had control, but it would have been a lot softer. But obviously I didn't know that at the time. But in terms of like the headshot itself, it's not bad. It's not bad. You know, how I have them framed, posed, all that, not bad. But the editing, it just falls apart. I mean, there's a lot of red. This is a little brighter than it needs to be. I would, pull that down. This could have been a lot worse, but, and I mean, for the first headshot, probably not bad. but definitely not good either. But I learned a lot from this, because after I did this, I remember studying it, looking at it, and really trying to dissect. Because when I delivered this, I didn't love it. I was just kind of like, I almost didn't want to deliver it, because I want to say like I shot this overexposed, and then I was trying to like recover some highlights, and there was like a blue cast to it, which I'm not exactly sure if that was the flash or if it was, I'm not even, maybe I had some ambient light that was creeping in. I can't remember, but there was kind of like a blue tint to it that I was struggling to get rid of. And I couldn't just remove all the blue, because his tie was blue and his eyes were blue. So I couldn't just remove all the blue. And this was 10 years ago. So, Lightroom didn't have all the tools that it has today. And I did not know anything about Photoshop at the time. I didn't use Photoshop at all. It was strictly Lightroom. So I struggled with the blue tint, which you can kind of see in the skin tone. So it was a hard image to edit. And so I really had to go back to the drawing board and try to figure out like where I went wrong and what was going on, and just do better going forward, which I did not get better going forward for a while. I did a few more headshot sessions that were kind of equally as bad before I eventually improved and got better. So then this was the first senior session that I did. And again, for some reason, I just was all about this really warm edit. Like the raw files were nowhere near this warm. And then granted, this was, it was fall time. So, where we were, there were a lot of trees and things like that. But man, for some reason, I just edited very orange. And what I also noticed, and I didn't notice until I looked at these, because I haven't looked at these in years. I have not went back to look at these in years. I really don't go back and look at this stuff for the most part. But what I noticed was that a lot of these images in the first year that I was quote unquote a pro photographer, a lot of them are overexposed. So my guess is the monitor that I was using was dark. So I was compensating for that monitor being dark. And now that I'm looking at it on calibrated monitors, it's clear to me that a lot of these images were overexposed. Nowadays, I use a different method to check for exposure, so that way I don't have to worry about the brightness of the monitor at all. But some of these are definitely bright, and the editing, the yellows are just intense here. And I think I pumped these up because I was trying to go for like this fall vibe. So I really pumped up the yellows and the greens and the saturation just to like drive that point home. As you can see here, it's just like, there's just a lot of color, very intense color, just like in your face, boom. So yeah, I shot this whole session with my my 135 f2. So I was like excited to use that lens because I think I had just got it shortly before I did this session. So I was like excited to have, this quote unquote portrait lens, and it was an f2, and just the bokeh was going to be great. And I mean, I shot them all at f2, I'm pretty sure, because why would I not? And I also noticed that this was I got into this phase of, and I feel like every photographer at some point was in a phase like this, where you learn about the tone curve, and you raise the left part of the tone curve to lift the black point. And so you kind of get like this quote unquote faded film look. I was just getting into that with these. So I don't know how well it'll come across in the live, but I definitely was starting the phase of raising that point just to kind of get that faded film look. So yeah, compositionally, I actually was pretty happy with these shots. And I actually showed up to this location like an hour and a half before he was to show up, so that I could like walk through the whole thing and get some ideas of shots that I wanted to get, composition, framing, all of that stuff. I really put a lot of effort into this because I wanted to knock it out the park. So it's like compositionally, I to this day, I'm still fairly happy. There are some things I would do different, of course, but compositionally, I'm pretty happy with these shots. It's just the editing. The editing, I just, I missed the mark on the editing, but it kind of is what it is. Like the editing here, I think, as a matter of fact, I do very much remember what the problem was on here. So down in this spot here, we were deep in where we were. So there were a lot of trees, a canopy of trees. So we were like down at the bottom, there was a little stream. So there pretty much was trees all around us. So it created this green color cast. And at the time, I had no idea how to deal with it. Like I wasn't that great in Lightroom. I clearly wasn't good at editing. So I had no idea how to deal with the green cast. And you can see it in these images. Nowadays, it would not be an issue whatsoever. But back then, I had no clue how to deal with it. But outside of that, like I still think the shots are pretty good for what they are. I would just edit them differently today. So then here I had another family session. I actually did a lot of family sessions my first year, and it made me realize how much I did not enjoy doing family sessions. And that is why to this day, I do not do a lot of family sessions, because I just don't enjoy doing them. I don't enjoy trying to work with kids because it's a lot of work. And as a man, I just don't really have it in me to do the things that you have to do to like keep kids' attention and to entertain them and all of that stuff. Like I was just at a family session when I was back home in Ohio, and the photographer did an amazing job. She was so prepared. She did an amazing job. But when you just hear her, she sounds like a complete fool. And I say that in a very nice and respectful way. She did what she had to do, to be able to keep the kids' attention. But it's just like, I'm just not into that. I just don't have any desire to do that. And, people will be like, oh, if you don't do family photos, you're leaving so much money on the table. And it's just like, well, that's a silly thing to say, because anything you don't shoot, you're leaving money on the table. There's people that don't shoot weddings, you're leaving money on the table. But there's a reason why people don't shoot weddings. If you don't want to shoot weddings, you don't enjoy shooting weddings, you're not going to shoot weddings. It doesn't matter if you can make money doing it. So when it comes to families, I just don't enjoy it. I do not enjoy it unless it is the kids are older. What's up, Chris? Yeah, kids are just like young kids. It's tough. So when I was doing this shoot, I was in over my head. I had not practiced with any children whatsoever. And this kid was like on a sugar high times 10. Like you couldn't get him to stand still at all. I mean, he was running around all over the place. At this point, I had my Canon 6D. So I was using my Canon 6D for this session. Now, if you're a Canon shooter, you will be familiar with the autofocus on it. If you're not a Canon shooter, I'll tell you the autofocus on the 6D was not great. I want to say it only has 9 focus points, and the servo autofocus or continuous focus, whatever you want to reference it, was not great on the 6D. It was not great. It was a great sensor, but for movement and tracking, it was not good. So it was challenging to even get any kind of sessions to get any kind of shots, because he just was all over the place. And I was using my 24-105 because at the time I'm like, okay, I need to be able to shoot wide, but I need something long as well. So I knew the 70-200, that was going to be too long. And at this point in time, I really wasn't, I wasn't into like dual bodies. I don't know why I didn't, because I would have had my 6D. I obviously would have still had my T4i. I could have just used both and used 2 lenses. But at the time, that wasn't even, I didn't like in my head, I didn't even know that was a thing that I could do that. So I knew I needed something wide, but I knew I needed something long as well. So I had a 24-105. The 24-105 was the only lens that I've ever bought secondhand. I bought it off of a guy, and the whole thing was sketched. Like the way he rolled up, he had like two people with him. Like I was convinced I was getting ready to get robbed, but I'm pretty sure I had my firearm on me because it just everything about it was sketch, and it ended up working out fine. But anyway, I digress. So yeah, it was tough to get shots. It was tough to get shots. So we had to do a lot of just like letting him do his thing, because like every time she tried to hold him, this is what we would get. He just wasn't about it. He did not want to not be running around and playing, which is understandable. That's the thing about kids. Like it's tough to get them to want to just pose for pictures. Now, the mistake that I made that I wouldn't make today, and a piece of advice that I would give anybody that's doing family stuff, if you've got young kids, you have to do the posy, sit down, stationary stuff first. Because if you let kids start playing and then you try to stop them to take stationary photos, it almost never will work. So if you are planning to do any type of like group family, let's all stand here or sit here and get these pictures, knock that out before you let the kids do anything. Because I'm telling you, once they're gone, good luck getting them back. So I did not do that. Like as soon as he got there, it was play mode and he was doing his thing. So it was almost impossible to get any of those shots because he just wasn't for it. But I felt like I did a pretty decent job. Again, the editing is not great, and I definitely lifted that black point on these as well. But I kind of just let him do his thing and just got shots where I could. I can't remember how many shots I took, probably a ton. But I just kind of let him do his thing. I think this was one of my favorite, just because I just kind of liked having him on the far left and just kind of looking out this way, and the viewer was able to use their imagination on what was over here. It was just his mom's boyfriend, but you could use your imagination to be like, he looks happy and he's looking at something, and you kind of can fill in the blank. So I like that shot. And I was able to get that one. I can't remember how I got him to do that, because again, this was 10 years ago, so I don't really remember. I know I wasn't doing any baby talk though. What's up, Jay? Yeah, I know I wasn't doing any kind of baby talk. I'll tell you that for sure. This was also one of this was probably my favorite shot from the whole shoot. I don't know why I did it in black and white. I think I do know why I did it in black and white. At the time, I felt like black and white kind of added like this level of what's the word I'm looking for? Timelessness, which making something black and white can do that, but it doesn't become that just because you make it black and white. But at the time, if I felt like it was a moment that felt like it was something special, I was like, oh, I got to make it black and white so that it's timeless. Nowadays, I'm way more intentional with when I convert something to black and white. And I don't know that this image necessarily works as a black and white. Like it is a great moment. I do love the moment and I love the image, but I don't know that it necessarily works as a black and white. If that might not make sense, but in my eyes, I don't think I would convert this to a black and white today. But I do love that moment in the image. But yeah, it was just a lot of just letting him do his thing, and then this was right at the end. He was tired at this point, and that was the only reason. I think she promised him some kind of something, so that was the only reason we were able to get that shot. So then that same day, I did another family session. So I had the one that I just showed, that was in the morning. This was in the afternoon. And this location was the same location that I did my first client shoot in. So I definitely really favored that spot. Went there a lot. Now, what was interesting about this session was that I went the complete opposite on editing. So up to this point, I made things very warm. with this session, I had like this desaturated look that I also don't understand. I think I went from one extreme to the next. Again, I was working on a monitor that wasn't calibrated, and I didn't really know how to read the histogram. I didn't really understand color. I didn't understand how it all worked. And the interesting thing about that is a lot of times, like, people will be like, well, you know, at what point do you consider yourself a professional photographer? And it's a question that, if you think about it, is really difficult to answer, because some people will say, if you charge money for a session, you're a professional. But it's like, it's kind of tough to say that, because if I was just like, hey, I'm an electrician now, and you needed an you know, you had some issue, would you want to hire me just because I decided today that I'm charging money? Or maybe I had, you know, I replaced a light switch for somebody and they paid me for it, so now I'm considering myself a professional electrician. Would you feel comfortable having me come and diagnose some big problem and rewire all of this stuff? Probably not, right? So it's tough to say like, oh, well, if you charge, that makes you a professional. But then if you take that part out of it, how do you really define what a professional, like, at what point do you become professional? Like, is it, oh, well, you got to have shot for this number of years, or you had to have done this number of sessions? It's like an impossible question to answer. But I don't even know where I was going with that. Oh, so I said all that to say that it's like, here I am charging people for images, but I don't even understand how to read a histogram. I don't really understand color. I didn't understand, even though I understood the exposure triangle, I didn't really know how to put it into practice. Case in point, my first session, I'm shooting at 1/50th of a second on a 55 to 250, but my ISO is at 200. That doesn't make sense. At 1/50th, you're almost certainly going to get some sort of motion blur, yet I'm shooting at ISO 200. So it's like, I understood all of this stuff individually. I understood the exposure triangle. I understood all of these things, but yet I wasn't putting it into practice during the shoot. So, you know, that's always an interesting thing when it's like, you know, what makes you a professional? It's a hard question to answer. So this one, I was really nervous about this one, because this was the biggest family that I had shot at the time. And so I was just like, man, how am I going to pose them? I knew that they had a range of ages on the kids. I was nervous. Now, I feel like, and maybe anybody that watches this may disagree, but I feel like I didn't do bad on posing them. Maybe not the best, definitely not the best, but I feel like I didn't do terrible. This kind of hurts, because, you know, anytime you have a group, you really just don't want to have people's heads on this different of a plane. I mean, it makes sense if there was another row of heads right here, but you know, you don't want to have the viewer having to look all over the place just to find people. So this one, not so much. Like, these aren't bad. You know, you got your triangles in here, little gap here, so I could have moved them over, but you know, you got your triangles in here, so this I feel like it works. But here, you know, I was doing the classic like walk that sort of kind of worked, kind of didn't. The thing about that is like getting everybody to walk at the same pace, because you typically want to have everybody on the same plane, so that way you get everybody in focus. But that's tough to do, especially when you got a kid this young that they're not thinking photos, they're just thinking like playtime. So it was tough. It was tough. In today's time, I definitely would have had them get a little bit closer together. Anytime I do a group photo, especially if it's someone like a family or something like that, I try to avoid gaps in between people, because your gaps kind of signify separation, and separation is never good if it's family or a couple or anything of the sort. So I always try to, you know, not have gaps if I can avoid it. So I would definitely do that differently today. But outside of that, you know, I made it through. Like, I was super nervous in the beginning, and then once we got going, like, my nerves was calm, and I was, you know, I felt pretty good, pretty confident in what I was doing. not exactly sure why I got so much space up top here. Who knows? Don't know what I was going for. And again, with the editing, it's just like, man, I went from really warm to really cool. Don't know. Then I did some individual ones of the kids, which I feel like, they weren't bad. These are definitely overexposed as well, just a little bit. So I would definitely bring the exposure down. And then, I mean, especially this one, like, man, it's just so bright unnecessarily and so cool. I mean, again, I don't know if you can see how blue this is, but it definitely is way too cool, and not the cool in a good way. The shots of him turned out great. These were the ones that I liked the most, just because they turned out so good. But these were kind of easy. I mean, he was sitting down. I was able to just kind of focus and compose. It wasn't really moving around too much. So these worked good. And he had, really blue eyes. So I would say I pumped up the saturation on the blue too much, but I was a fan of those. So then here was just a little Christmas kid session that I did. And actually these turned out really good. So this whole set, like his mom set up. And so there wasn't a whole lot for me to do, because it was just kind of this stationary spot. And I don't think I lit this. Like, I don't think I used flash, but maybe I did. I might have. Yeah, I mean, it does look like he's got a catch light. So I probably, maybe I bounced it. I don't know if I was using soft boxes at this time. I don't think I had any soft boxes my first year. I don't think, but I'm not sure. But these turned out really good. The only thing that's interesting is how red I made these. So if I were to go here and go on this part right here, we'll go here, because this is obviously white. This is really what it should have been. So I'm not exactly sure what my thought process was on making it so red. This is definitely the color of that wall over here. So I don't know why I made it so red like that. I think I was going for a vibe. I don't know. You know how it is, when you first get into like editing and stuff like that, you kind of be all over the place. So yeah, I thought these were really, really great shots. That there wasn't a whole lot with it, and since it was so stationary, I really was able to just take the time to kind of work with the kid, and well, not even really compose, because it was what it was. So I wasn't moving around. So I felt like they turned out pretty good, and he gave quite a bit of character. So I was pretty happy. I was pretty happy with those. And then the last one that I'm going to go over before I sign off is another engagement session. Now, this one, I very much so remember this session. I don't remember what a lot of those other sessions I was charging, but I very much so remember that I charged $100 for this session right here. And I delivered 51 photos. We shot for at least 2 hours, if it wasn't 3 hours. And I just think about that today, and I'm just like, man, so a 2-hour shoot, delivered 50 edited photos for $100. Now, mind you, I was still working my 9 to 5 at the time. So I wasn't doing photography full time. So, it wasn't like I was trying to make a living off of photography, but still, that's a lot of work for $100. So on this day, I got lucky because it was cloudy. And so back at that time, I really enjoyed cloudy days, because cloudy days meant soft light. Now, in today's world, it still means the same thing, but I actually don't really like shooting on cloudy days because the light is just too flat. I just don't enjoy it. Now, depending upon how cloudy it is, there can still be some direction to the light. Like if it's kind of high clouds that aren't super thick, those kind of cloudy days I like, because you still can have some direction to the light. Wherever the sun is at, you're going to have more intense light coming from that direction than in other spots. So you still have some directionality to the light. But on heavy overcast days, the light is just too flat. And I don't like flat light. It's soft, yes. It's easy to work with, yes. But even on cloudy days, I still will probably use off-camera flash just because I need highlight and I need shadow. That is what defines the face. That is what's taking a 3D subject that you're putting on this 2D medium. That's how you give it depth. You need highlight and you need shadow. So when everything is just flat, it technically can look pleasing, but it's just not my taste anymore. But back then, cloudy days were my favorite. I enjoyed cloudy days because I really didn't know about flash all like that. I was using it, but I didn't really know about it. So if I didn't have to deal with it, that was a win for me. This is a terrible black and white conversion. This was, see, you know, you always have your phases when you start. At this time, for whatever reason, when I was converting something to black and white, I would go to the tone curve. So I would convert it to a black and white. Then I would go to the tone curve and go to the blue channel. And then I would raise the blue channel a little bit. Don't know why. For some reason, I thought that made the black and white have like this look to it that just looked better. Like it made it more silver than black and white, if that makes any sense. So that was how I did all of my black and white images. And now I look at it and I'm just like, it drives me crazy now. But that was definitely what I did. So every black and white that I had, desaturation. Yeah. No, I think I probably did just remove the saturation. I don't think I was using the I don't even know if they had the black and white button 10 years ago. They might have. I don't know. So yeah, man, editing, you know, again, I went from really warm to really cool. Like this one is really cool. And I mean, obviously it was a cloudy day. It actually had rained a little bit earlier, so we didn't even know if we were going to be able to do the session. But man, they're still too cool. And I actually shot these with on-camera flash. Not all of the shots, but I did do some of them with on-camera flash. And that was, you know, that was what it was. Now, all in all, you know, I wouldn't say the images are bad. I think they're okay, but I would definitely pose like this is one where I use on-camera flash, and you can just see where it just doesn't. It looks flashy. It looks flashy. I had no concept of balancing flash with ambient. Yeah, man, I got all the raw. I have all my raw files from the day I first got my T4i all the way to now. Yeah, I have them all. So yeah, you know, I caught some good moments. This was my favorite shot from the whole session. I remember like this was the main picture that I was using in my portfolio at the time. Because I just, you know, I loved how it turned out. I want to say I used my 135 on this as well, my 135 f2. So I was able to, you know, kind of get this separation. I was real big on the whole standing in the middle of the street look at the time. That was like my thing. Like, let me put you in the street, shoot at 130, you know, shoot my 135 at f2. So the background is nice and blurry. And like, that was like my go-to. If I was doing couples or just like a single person, that was my go-to. Let's go stand in the street. And in downtown Columbus, they have a lot of streets like this. It's kind of fake cobblestone. It's not real cobblestone, but you know, they have they used to. I don't think they do anymore. But they used to have a lot of streets like this. So it was really cool to shoot on these streets. So yeah, you know, it was now I'm going to tell you about this shot right here because I remember exactly why I framed this way. And now that I think about it, it's cheesy as hell to me. But at the time, this was my thought. So I saw this sign. Again, this was an engagement shoot. So I saw this sign, no stopping any time. So I said, let's go take a shot right there. And this sign will symbolize that you guys will never stop loving each other. That was how I incorporated this sign. That is what it was supposed to represent. And when I brought that to them, they loved it. They were like, yeah, let's do it. Let's do it. And at the time, I'm just like, I'm a genius. I am a genius. Like, I'm great at this. I look at this now and I'm just like, although like the concept is fine, it is what it is. I feel like if you have to, if you, so I say this kind of loosely, but I feel like if you have to explain the image, you maybe didn't quite hit the mark that you were going for. I know sometimes like you do images and the whole point of how you do something is to get people to kind of just interpret it however they want. I get that. This was not that type of image. Like this was a very specific meaning. And it's like, if I have to explain it, like if I didn't explain it, I don't know that you would have came to that conclusion. So it's like when you have something that's like, there's a specific meaning, your audience should be able to get that without having to be explained. And I highly doubt that you would have got that if I didn't explain it. I think there's a big difference in a technical sense. When you really think about it, people is where you skilled up the most. The same two posing all these shots trying to get the couple out. Yeah. You know, I wasn't, you know, it's interesting because I thought that I was good at posing, but the problem was, here's the biggest problem. And this is a good thing to think about, because any new photographer that's coming into the game, this is definitely a tip that I would give with posing. My problem was I would look at poses like on Pinterest or Flickr, and then I would memorize those poses, and then I would try to put the subject in those poses. And where that is a problem is that I didn't understand how to pose. I was just trying to duplicate something that I saw. And the issue is that a lot of times poses that you see, they work for the people that's doing that pose, but they don't always work for everybody. A case in point in that is one of the poses that you see with couples a lot is you have the guy standing behind the female and he has his arms, like he has like a, you know, the left arm wrapped around, like holding her, and like his left arm is kind of like at the top of her chest or whatever, and like her head is like resting in his shoulder. That only works when you have enough of a height difference. Like the guy has to be a certain height, the girl has to be a certain height for that to work. If you took a guy and a girl that were the same height, that pose will not work. Because at that point, his arm, in order for him to wrap his arm around the girl, his arm is going to be elevated. His shoulder is going to be up because they're the same height. Likewise, if he's too tall, it's not going to work, because where she's at and where he's at, his arm would have to just be hanging down to get there. So the problem that I made was that I would just find a pose that I liked, and then I would just try to duplicate it instead of understanding how to pose. And I feel like that's a big mistake that a lot of photographers going into portrait makes. And experienced photographers, that's kind of the advice that they give you. They're like, oh, well, just kind of find some poses that you like, put them in your phone. And, you know, if you run out of ideas, just kind of do these poses that you have. And it's not bad advice, but when you're new to it, and that's kind of the only thing you're doing, you end up trying to do stuff, and then when it doesn't work, and that definitely happened on this shoot, when it doesn't work, you panic. And that's exactly what happened. And that's the reason why I took so many shots of like the same thing, because I'm like, in my head, I'm like, this is the pose, but I'm looking at it in front of me and it's not turning out how I'm thinking it should turn out. And I didn't know how to adjust to fix it because I didn't understand posing. So you definitely have to understand how to pose. And then once you understand how to pose, then you can take, you know, find poses that you like, and you'll be good enough to be able to say, okay, based off of who I have in front of me, these are the adjustments I have to make to this pose to be able to make it work. Do you have any good resources on learning poses for these types of shoots? I typically give candid tasks like hold each other and spin or whatever, but the content of the photo is number one. You know, to be honest and transparent, and that's just the type of photographer that I am, I think the best resource is practice. Because no matter what you look into, whether it's somebody like teaching you the fundamentals of posing or whether it's you looking at poses on Flickr or Instagram or whatever, it still is 1,000% different when you are actually working with real people. Everything that like I thought I knew and I'm like, I got this down. When you start working with people, it's different. And the only way that you can get better is to just work with people. So the way that I got over the hump is that I basically had a couple of friends. I had a couple couples. I had a girl that just liked to take pictures, and I just used them a lot. I just did a lot of sessions with them. Sometimes I wasn't even actually taking pictures. Like I was just working on posing with real people. Because like I said, when I was doing these sessions, I just realized that it was just like, it wasn't as easy as I thought it was going to be. Like you look at the picture and you're just like, oh, I just got to put the people like this and it should look just as good as this image. And that was just not happening for me at all. I just kept falling flat on my face. So I was just like, okay, clearly I don't know what I'm doing. I mean, that was the realization that I came to. I don't know what I'm doing. I'm trying to just duplicate something and it's not working. So I just used people that I knew that were willing to just let me work on posing so that I could understand the way things worked and the way couples worked. And then I just got better that way. So at this point, I would say the best advice is to find pictures of poses that you like, then find people that you can practice those poses with. To me, I think that's the best way to go, because it's kind of tough to just like figure out like just from scratch how you want to pose somebody. If you want to watch somebody that really puts a lot into doing something like that, you can look at Jerry Gionis's videos. He's kind of like a master of posing every little piece of somebody in almost a clinical scientific type of way, which is not my style. I don't particularly like to do that. So that's not the way I pose. But like, if you really want to get like the deep breakdown of posing and how things really fit together, Jerry Gionis would be a great resource for that, in my opinion. So yeah, here at this point, yeah, I was trying to just get him to just do stuff just so that way it took the pressure off of me, because by this point I was in straight panic mode because I was just like, man, ain't nothing working. So, you know, to not freak out, I was just like, okay, let me put him in action mode and just have him do some stuff. So then that way it takes the pressure off of me a little bit. And I was able to regroup and figure out like, okay, what do I want to do? So after we did this right here, and for anybody that may watch this video that's familiar with Columbus, this is Arena District, which is a really cool place to shoot. Don't know if you can still shoot there, but it's a cool place to shoot if you can. So once we did this part here, then I was like, okay, my nerves were calm. So then I was like, okay, let's go sit down and do some sit down shots. Cause I had realized, see, this is how I go when you be on these photo shoots, especially when you're new. I realized I really didn't get any shots of like the ring yet. And it was an engagement shoot. And I didn't really get like the classic ring portraits, which I didn't really do the best of job with this, but I realized I hadn't got that. So I was like, oh man, I need to get some shots of the ring. So, you know, of course I'm doing the classic poses, you know, hand out, hand on face to show the ring. And again, I did a terrible job. Like, you really can't see it at all. I didn't make sure that it was like visible and it's down here, and you know, so didn't do the best job. But at this point, that was kind of what I was going for with these shots. Was I was like, oh, I gotta get these ring shots in. So this one wasn't bad. So I, you know, took a lot of those and then kind of came in tight. Definitely would compose it differently today because this is busy. Obviously, I mean, you got this whole part right here that's just a mess, you know. So I would definitely, you know, kind of clean this up today. But you know, this is how you learn. You just have to do. And then so we end with that. So these were all from my first year of being a professional photographer. And like I said, you know, when you go back to, you know, how do you define if you're a professional? You know, if I look at where I'm at now and I look at the journey, if somebody were to say in 2014, based on what you know now, when you look back at what you did in 2014, would you still consider yourself a professional photographer? Me personally, I would say no, because even though I was making money off of photography, there were fundamentals about photography and working with people that I just simply did not know. I did not have a firm understanding. I didn't know how to apply them when I was actually working with people. And to me, if you don't understand the fundamentals of what you're doing, if you don't understand how to work with people, if you don't understand how to connect with people, if you don't understand that when you are dealing with people, you shouldn't be shooting at a 50th of a second at ISO 200. If you don't understand that during the session, in my humble opinion, you can't consider yourself a professional photographer, because these are things that if you're going to be charging someone money and they're having an expectation that you're going to be able to deliver a certain level of what it is you're doing, there's just things that you should understand, and I don't feel like we can be like, oh, well, if what you provided matched your portfolio, then you're good. Or, if you're making money, then you're good. Or, if you're able, there's just certain things that you really have to understand to be able to consider yourself a professional. Now, that's not to say that like you got to know it in and out. That's not to say that you got to be a master at it. That doesn't mean, you got to understand every nuance of everything. I certainly don't think that's the case, but you really should understand just the basics of photography. And I thought that I knew that because I had watched a ton of YouTube before I got to this point. So like the technical parts of photography, I understood. I knew exactly what ISO was. I knew about the exposure triangle. I knew depth of field. I knew, all of these things. I knew all of it. From a technical perspective, I knew all of it. I studied it. I knew it all. But what I didn't know is how to actually apply all of that when I was working with people. That was the key piece that was missing. And it's like, you can have all the knowledge in the world, but if you don't know how to apply it when you're actually working with people, it doesn't matter. You could know everything about planes, how they fly, how they work, everything. But if you sit in that captain's chair and you can't make all of that work when it's time to put that plane in the sky, you're not a pilot. It's just that simple. And so if I was to look back, I would say, no, I was not really a professional. Now, if somebody were to say, okay, at what point do you feel like you went into being a professional by your standards today? I'm not exactly sure. Because that transition, it wasn't like a night day transition. You don't just, today I'm not a professional, tomorrow I am. There were things would happen in shoots. And I would just jot that down and be like, yeah, I messed that up. I need to do better. To this day, I still have a document that I keep. Every photo shoot that I do, every single one, whether it is a paid shoot or a collab shoot or a test shoot, every single photo shoot that I do, still to this day, I have a document where I put, what did I do right? What did I do wrong? How can I improve? Every single photo shoot that I do. Because at the end of the day, there's always room to learn. And this can be, I do feel like this mindset can be detrimental. Like the whole mindset of like, you can always learn, that can be problematic in some ways, because the issue with that is you never are really happy or satisfied with what you've done. Right? If I do a photo shoot and I'm always looking for things that I did wrong and how I can improve, I never really just sit in a moment of saying, I did great on that shoot. I knocked that out the park. That was good right there. I never really sit in that, because I'm always looking for, how can I improve? What did I do that wasn't the greatest, and how can I get better? So you do have to be careful with that, because you don't want to get to a point where you just feel like, well, what's the point? I'm never going to be able to have something to where it just was good and there was nothing that I can improve. So you do have to be careful with that. But I do that so that way I can continue to grow as a photographer. And I actually reference that document all the time. I don't just do it and then never go back and look at it. I look at that stuff all the time. And I look at the images from that session and I'm like, yeah, okay, I see where I messed up there. And I try to make a point to not repeat that. And I can't say that I never repeat stuff, because sometimes I'm just on a session and it's just moving so fast and I make bonehead mistakes, things that as soon as I'm done, I'm like, I know better than that. But just sometimes when you're in the moment and things, especially when things don't go the way they're supposed to go, which if you do photography professionally, you will have so many shoots where things don't go according to plan. They don't go exactly how you're thinking they're going to go. And when you plan for this stuff, you plan for everything to go exactly how you want. And if it goes that way, you're in a good position. But a lot of shoots don't go that way, and you have to call a lot of audibles or make a lot of decisions on the fly. And even to this day, sometimes I just don't make the right decisions. And it's, I don't like to beat myself up about it, but it's like, it's things that but sometimes when you have pressure, you just don't make the right decision. Sometimes I just don't make the right decision. Sometimes I do something and I'm just like, I look back on it and I'm just like, man, why did I do that? Why did I make that call? That just wasn't the right call. So I use that document to be able to look at stuff like that. And I can go back and be like, okay, when I'm faced with this situation in the future, I can think about that and I know which way that's going to go. So, hopefully I could do something different. So I don't know at what point I technically became a professional photographer. I mean, obviously I do it full time now. So, obviously I consider myself a professional photographer today, but I don't know where that transition happened. So well said and agree greatly. With cameras nowadays, I'm starting to realize there's a lot of grace with mistakes that new photographers make, but the content and people are where the biggest difference comes. That is true. And I mean, man, photography has never been easier. When you think about the technology and cameras today and what cameras can do today, I mean, just eye autofocus alone is an absolute game changer. People throw around the game changer word way too loosely, but eye autofocus, like mirrorless cameras and eye autofocus, that truly was a game changer. I mean, when you think about, if you've been doing photography long enough to where you started on DSLRs, especially like, a camera like the 6D where you got 9 autofocus points, you got this whole frame, you got 9 focus points and they're always right in the center. Just think about how difficult it would be for you to get the shots that you get today if you only had 9 focus points and you had to get the eye on one of those focus points, or you had to focus and recompose. Imagine how much more challenging photography would be if that was still the case. A lot of photographers, and I'm using air quotes, but a lot of photographers I don't think would be able to be anywhere close to what they are today if they had to use DSLR cameras. Because back then you had to know what you was doing. You had to know what you was doing. You really couldn't rely on just the camera itself. You really had to know what you were doing to be able to get some solid shots, especially if you were shooting, an f1.4 lens or 1.2. I mean, even a 2.8, they were not forgiving. They were not forgiving at all. You really had to know what you were doing. But anyway, I appreciate you guys tuning in. Hopefully you enjoyed this little trip down memory lane. And if you are watching this after the fact, hopefully you enjoyed it as well. So yeah, thank you for tuning in, and hopefully you guys have had a great Sunday. Have a great work week, and I'll be back next Sunday to do it all over again. So be safe, enjoy. It's crazy to think it's almost Christmas time and almost New Year's. 2023 is basically over. It's crazy. It's crazy. Anyway, sayonara. Catch you guys later.